I'm bringing on, I think one of the, I don't know, someone I think of as one of the original YouTube philosophy creators, someone who's put in so many hours of their work into the world. Dr. Gregory P. Sadler. Gregory, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, and very nice to meet you. You know, you're in the lineage of those people that I've spent so many hours of my life watching and never met in person. And I'm pretty sure you're not AI.
Well, I mean, if I start glitching out, you'll probably figure out whether I am or not, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I
not
mean,
it's not
that's a test.
sophisticated enough at this point.
Yeah, this is all really just an excuse for me to do a sort of Turing test of online figures. And also, I say this to people sometimes when they come on the show. I love the consistency of you having a background that I've seen, but I know that chalkboard.
Oh, with the chalkboard and the lighting and books. Yeah.
Yes, so I really trust that. Well, I have a bunch of stuff I'd love to ask you about
Sure.
today. I'll maybe start with this, and you actually spoke about this, I think, kind of recently, because I think I know the answer to this, but maybe other folks don't. Um, I'm curious about the point in your life or the first text you encountered that sort of set your path down the philosophic rabbit hole that you've now spent decades of your
Oh,
life in.
yeah, I don't really have that sort of origin story, unfortunately. The
Hey,
first philosophical
yeah.
text that I got my hands on was Camus' Myth of
Mhm.
Sisyphus, and I
Yeah.
probably only understood about 10% of it. And it's not like I then became enamored of Camus or
Yeah.
existentialism or anything like that. I just thought it was kind of a cool book that my uncle happened to have. Um, I mean, I think it's more like a bit here and a bit here and a bit here. And actually, this might be something useful for any like young people who
Mhm.
are watching this. You don't have to have any of this stuff figured out when you begin studying because you're probably going to like change your mind about it a couple years in. I think this is really cool right now. This is absolutely awesome. And then, a couple years later, you're like, I'm moving on to this instead, and this is better.
Yeah. Um, well, so then what got you into philosophy in a more serious way
Oh,
then? So you encountered Camus, which is it's cool. And that's
yeah.
actually Camus in that category of folks. So I feel like a lot of people had an important or interesting encounter with Camus. And it's something you said as well that I'll point this out again for like younger folks or folks who are newer in philosophy that's watching. You know, when you said you understood like 10% of it, that's more than enough to
At
get
best.
started. Yeah, but that's honestly like I think so sometimes when I think like, philosophy begins in wonder, what does that mean? Sometimes it means that like you understand just enough to know that there's something interesting there that
Oh,
you want to explore further. Like there's
yeah.
just like a glimpse where you're like, I can hold on to this and kind of keep going from here.
Yeah, and you've got enough to like apply it maybe dangerously to your life as well, right? And it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be just philosophy, it could be literature or things like that. If you don't mind me going off on a tangent, I'll
please
tell you
do.
about something really stupid I did in high school. So, and it wasn't from philosophy, it was from a song by a metal band called Accept, who I still love today. And so there was this girl that I was kind of dating, and we'd back then you'd like call on the phone, and it was
Mhm.
the not even a cordless phone, and you chat about random stuff because you didn't want to like reveal anything really personal to the other person. And we had a date where she came over to go sledding because we had a big hill behind our house, and we chatted a lot, and kind of awkwardly at the end of it, before her dad came to pick her up, made out a little bit. And I'd heard this Accept song, and it's called Losing More Than You've Ever Had.
Mhm.
And this is where like thinking big thoughts and like trying to apply them to your life, you can really screw things up. So I was like, what would it be like to lose more than you ever had? That's a really interesting idea. And so I turned this into basically what we nowadays call ghosting, and effectively just ghosted her, just stopped
Wow.
her. And it was really a jerk move. But I thought, I was like, yeah, I'm going to try this idea out. And understandably, she was really quite angry with me. And I had some blowback in school.
Oh my God.
But when I look back on it, there was like, I don't know what my thought process was other than that. And if I mentioned it to anybody, I'm sure they'd have said, that's a stupid idea. Don't do that.
Uh-huh.
But people do this kind of stuff. And you could do that with like Camus. Imagine that you're like, the only philosophical question is suicide. Maybe I should try it. I mean, that would be a terrible application
Yeah,
as
no one do
well.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So
wow. Well, then from encountering Camus, from inventing ghosting after a sledding date, when did you start formally studying philosophy?
Oh, well, that wasn't until I was an undergraduate. I did have 2 philosophy classes in high school because I went to a
Oh, that's
Catholic high
cool.
school.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and the one that was actually called Intro to Philosophy, and I've written about this, and
Yeah.
it's called A Tale of Two Philosophy Professors. So I'll just give you like the thumbnail
Yeah.
sketch of it. So the official philosophy class just sucked. It was taught by a guy who really had no real love for the topic. He used a stupid textbook, Marvin Gardner's The Whys of a Philosophical Scrivener. That's quite boring and abstract. And he was not interested in like any of us. He wanted us to like take what he had on the board, write it down, regurgitate it on the
Mhm.
test. So not really philosophy. I think I got a B or a C in the class. And then we had this other guy, who I recently found out died back in 2009,
Oh,
unfortunately. And his name was Perry Lorenzo. And he came in to teach for a semester. The nun who was going to teach our sacraments class, who was, I guess, not a very nice person at all. She got sick and eventually died. So he came in. He was in the Wisconsin area because I found out more details about him later. He was studying at Marquette and then
oh, nice.
decided not to do that. And so for a semester, he taught us this sacraments class in the afternoons, probably 3 days a week. And he had had an Augustinian conversion. He's from Seattle,
Mhm.
and so he loved Augustine. He was like, I'm going to teach you about this guy because he has stuff to say about sacraments. But before I can teach you Augustine, in order to understand him, you've got to learn something about Plato and about Aristotle and about ancient Greek and Roman
Mhm.
culture. And the way that he taught was very philosophical. He said, your textbook, just get rid of it. I'm going to put stuff up on the board.
Mhm.
I'll lecture a bit. We'll discuss things. I'll ask you questions. And so, most of the students just hated it because they were all college prep kids. They wanted, what answers do I need to like give back? And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I was the kind of kid, I was what they called a burnout back then. So I had
Uh-huh.
long hair and leather jacket and sleep in class and screw around. And I didn't do any drugs, but I drank a lot and get in fights and stuff like that and listen to heavy metal.
Yeah.
And so he could see past that, and he was like, yeah, this screw up, he's worth talking to. And I really enjoyed the class, and it wasn't called philosophy, but he was like showing us how to do
Yeah. He
philosophy.
was he was doing philosophy and exemplifying that way of thinking. And that's what you found
Yeah,
so
yeah.
compelling.
And so then go in the army, get out in
Mhm.
the what did they call it, reduction of force.
Huh.
We called it budget cuts, but
Huh.
basically they're sending a bunch of people home. So I get home and I'm working in restaurants for a while, and reading some books, but not in any sort of serious way. Screwing around, partying.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, this kind of sucks. I should go to college.
Uh-huh.
So, and I came from a family where not many people went to college. My dad had done so, but he died when I was 11. So
Mm.
he didn't have any guidance to offer as a ghost. And, so I just picked some place and went there for college. And my mom's old boyfriend, who was kind of like a surrogate father figure.
Mhm.
He'd been to college, and he said, when you get to college, just declare a major right away. It doesn't matter what it is. You'll not just be just any old freshman lost in the crowd. You'll have a community around you.
Yeah.
So I looked down the list because you go to the college and then they sign you up for classes. And my advisor was like, "What do you want to study?" And I looked down the list and it's like, philosophy. Oh, yeah, that sounds cool. I'll do that. So he's like, okay, we'll put you in intro and we'll throw you into these other classes as well, mostly gen ed, but
Mhm.
also calculus one, which
Tough.
it was good because it was taught as a theory class. And
Okay.
I'd never known that mathematics could actually be interesting. So, because it was always just like learn all this crap and then, again, regurgitate it. So I ended up majoring in philosophy and mathematics, and I started on a path and just kind of kept going by inertia. And my math professors were great. My philosophy professors sucked. They were
You had
both.
bad luck with this and two
Well,
schools in a
yes
row.
and no. I mean, in a way, it sounds like bad luck, but for somebody like me, it was actually helpful because I think if I had gone to a prestigious place
Mhm.
and studied with the right people, there's no way I would have turned out the
Mhm.
way that I did. I had to kind of figure things out for myself, and I could see that my professors didn't take this stuff that seriously, but I thought it was cool. So I spent a lot of time like reading stuff on my own that they thought was a waste of time. And it turned out good for me. And the same thing happened in grad school. Like I showed up. I took a year off in between undergrad and grad school and worked, and then went down to Southern Illinois. And the only reason I went there was because they had the most money for me the
Mhm.
quickest. Because I didn't know how
That
the
makes sense.
academic system
Yeah.
worked. Um, and so it turned out they had a great research library and they had this wonderful pluralistic department.
Mhm.
They were, ranked very, very low on like Leiter's philosophical
Mhm.
gourmet, but turned out that he's full of crap and
Mhm.
that
Very much so.
these things don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, long story short, I wound up, like learning, hey, if something is interesting, just go study it. And if somebody's going to say, "Oh no, we don't read that kind of stuff anymore," that's their problem. That's
Mhm.
not your problem. So it wound up, working out for me. I ended up, my first job was teaching in a maximum security prison, but it meant that I had to like teach the whole philosophy curriculum.
Yeah.
So I had to develop some real range, and that
Mhm.
was good for me too.
That's
So
really
yeah.
interesting. Um, well, then how, and you can fill in the gaps here as well, but then what happens between,
Mm.
studying philosophy, going to grad school, going to prison to teach philosophy, um, which a lot of like interesting history there too. I've never done it. I have some friends who have taught philosophy in prisons before. Obviously, interesting that some of the most foundational text we often read and dialogues are like Socrates in prison.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you had this experience. I've talked to friends before who've talked about how weird and interesting and impactful that can be when you're in prison and you're like,
Yeah.
here's a text that we normally teach in intro about a guy who is in prison facing death. Um, but what are the events that precipitated you starting to put things on the internet?
Oh. Um, so I was doing the like traditional academic route. And being a professor means like you got to put together portfolios of
Yeah.
what you're doing and all that. And I'd always had an interest in, let's call it like public philosophy, because that's the term that's being used nowadays. But
Mm-hmm.
I would call it like outreach,
Mm-hmm.
like going and talking at libraries or other groups where people would invite you in to do stuff. And that counted as service. So when I got to my second main professor job down in Fayetteville State in North Carolina, um, that that was like looked at as a really good thing, and I happened to enjoy doing that, so I did a lot of that. And I was on academia.edu
Uh-huh.
almost from the very
Oh
beginning.
wow.
So I got to see it transform from being something kind of cool to basically, a scam.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh,
I know, I
which
feel like that happened, and for folks who don't know, academia.edu was a website that at first sort of felt like minimalist Facebook
for
for academics.
academics. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was in grad school, like, would go on there, read people's work, would post things I was working on, and sometimes it was like a resource for getting clued up about jobs or conferences or things like that. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, and then it just got very, it was kind of, as I was getting out of academia, I wasn't using it anyways, but it just got very scammy and shitty feeling.
They they had, plans originally from the beginning, I think, to monetize it. And so they had to build a community of people who would, contribute decent content and engagement. And then they started rolling out all these features. And every single feature was like a gut punch. You'd be like, I
Yeah.
can't believe you're trying to get us to do this crap. And it's funny too, because they invited me as like a super user at different points to do like one-on-ones with some of their people. I forget what their title was, but it was something very corporate. And I just quit doing them after a while because I was like, as much as I've done for you guys, you should give me the whatever the thing is that you got to pay for. I was like, you should
Yeah,
comp
yeah,
me
yeah.
that. And they just never would do that. So nowadays we use fill papers
Mhm,
for what academia.edu was originally intended for. But I published a lot.
mhm.
So I loaded all my stuff up there, and every time I'd do a talk, I'd load the PowerPoint slides.
Mhm,
And so that was probably my first stuff. And then I started doing some blogging. I think a lot of us did back
mhm.
then,
Yeah.
and that was kind of fun. It was an opportunity to like write about, yeah, I'm doing this thing and I don't want to write a whole paper about it, but let's see what people think. But the biggest thing was YouTube, and that was not my own initiative.
Okay.
That I will say is 95% due to my now wife,
Mhm,
Andy Shaka. So she is, you could say, in technology, she's an early adopter.
mhm.
She's like an evangelist of technology. And at that time, she was actually the assistant dean of technology at the Culinary Institute of America,
Oh,
because
cool.
she got like ahead of the game in, with her writing classes, with
Mhm.
using Google Docs and stuff like that. And there's a whole story that she could tell. You might consider having her on
Yeah.
sometime, because she's a really cool person. So anyway, I'm more like conservative, not in a political sense,
Uh-huh.
but like in a curmudgeonly sense,
Yeah.
where I just want things to be what they are, and don't give me new features. I just want stuff to work. So she got me a flip cam. And,
Mhm.
and there was literally a company called Flipcam at the time, and they went out of business, before too long. And it was so I could record stuff on my trips with my kids, because I was
Uh,
recently divorced. So, like summer trips. And then she suggested my last semester at Fayetteville State, because I was moving up in the summer of 2011 to be with her. She was living
mhm.
in New York, and we were doing this long distance thing. So, that sucked for a while.
Yeah.
And I didn't want her to come down to North Carolina. Frankly, I didn't want to be there either. And New York sounded better. So she said, why don't you record your class lectures?
Mhm.
And I was like, well, I don't know. That sounds like a lot of work. And then she was like, I mean, if your students miss class or they want to go back
Mhm.
over stuff, you'd have it as a resource for them. And you could put your stuff out on YouTube. And I was like, well, who would want to watch that? I'm a nobody at this little rinky dink university in the South. So she, she's very persuasive, and she, her biggest argument, which is a good one, was, what do you possibly have to lose? It's not like, if nobody watches this, it's not like your reputation is ruined as an academic
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that. So I was like, okay, so I'll do it. And I got this little tiny tripod and a flip
Mhm.
cam, and I just plop it down. And every once in a while, a student would like bump it so you can see it
Yeah.
shaking. And we loaded them into the institutional channel in the Fayetteville State YouTube, because you couldn't, at that time you could only upload like 10 minutes and then 20 minutes. And now it's like, you can record stuff for hours and hours.
Yeah.
But if you were an institution, you could have longer stuff. So that was the first like course that I recorded. And interestingly, people really responded to it. And the biggest kinds of comments I got were, thank you for doing this, because my professor won't explain anything, which just shows you how bad, a lot of academics are. I can't afford to go to school, or I've been out of school a long time. Thanks for uploading this, because I get to feel like I'm in a classroom and get to learn things. And then, people would have more focused questions on like, okay, so you're saying this, what does this mean? And then you interact with them, right? It was very, very cool to get to like answer questions and deal with comments and stuff like that. So I started recording some other series. I started recording the talks that I gave at different conferences. And then I started recording these short things that were like 15 minutes long, called Dr. Sadler Chalk and Talk. And the idea was to stick it to all the educational experts who were saying two things about video stuff. One was, videos can't be any longer than 5 minutes, because these younger people, and they meant millennials back then, who are now, quite a bit older, none of them have an attention span. They're going to quit watching you after 5 minutes, which turns out to be complete BS. If your content sucks, they'll quit watching after a couple minutes, but they'll watch hours and hours if you have interesting stuff. And then they were like, Chalk and Talk is dead. Don't ever lecture. It's got to be active learning stuff. And I was learning about that stuff. And I was like, I don't think Chalk and Talk is dead. I mean, you see the chalkboard behind you. I'm still
You're keeping it alive.
Yeah, you just got to like not suck at being a lecturer, and then Chalk and Talk is just fine. So I think a lot of this educational expert stuff, which is all boomers, you go to their conferences and they tell you how the younger generation are digital natives and all this stuff that they didn't know anything about, really. So I started recording those, and people liked them. And then I left Fayetteville State and moved up to New York to be with Andy. And then I was teaching at Marist College, and they had me teaching intro classes and ethics classes and occasionally some other stuff. So then I asked the chair, I was like, hey, can I record my classes? And she was like, yeah, why not? So every class that I taught, I would record the class session. And sometimes the battery would die because I didn't charge it well enough. But those started getting a ton of traction as well. So that would have been around 2011, 2012. YouTube was taking off at the time. You didn't have to be high tech. I mean, the sound quality on a lot of those, the lighting is pretty bad. But if you actually know what you're talking about and you can talk in an interesting way, and I think I'm helped out by the fact that I didn't come from an academic family. I came from, a bunch of people who actually, just work for a living, and I can relate to them, then it kind of didn't matter. You didn't need to be slick like some of these, School Life was taking off at the time, and they do all this like editing and production, but their stuff, I won't say too much bad about them, but I'll just say their stuff is kind of weak, you don't have to say anything. I'll just say I don't like it very much. And I think it's kind of bad and often reductive in a way that prioritizes making things sound sexy and slick. Yeah. But I said that, you didn't say that. You're pure class, and I'm out here being an asshole. So yeah, I'll outsource that to you. But so, you had basically two kinds of content on YouTube at the time. You had the high production, low rigor. And then you had the low production. Hey, these are people who care about what they're talking about and hopefully know what they're talking about. And it was kind of like, we could talk about the old days of everything was open. And it was really cool, because if you had stuff that people liked, you didn't have to worry about the algorithm. people would watch your stuff and it would rise.
Mhm.
And so, I had a lot of people like reaching out to me and saying the same sort of things. Thanks for posting this. My professor won't tell me anything about Aristotle, you know. Can you do more of this? Can you do more of that? And
Mhm.
I've been talking about this for a long time. So I'll draw this short by saying people kept saying, do videos on this, do videos on this, do videos on this. And so I took like a poll, and the people that I polled, the ones they were most interested in was Sartre, Heidegger, Marcuse, and
Mhm.
Hegel. I never did anything with Marcuse, but I did the half hour Hegel series, and then I did like
Mhm.
this existentialism series. And then it just kind of took off from there. And and you
Oh,
rolled out other features like doing live streams and things like that. So I've obviously added some stuff over time, but for the most part, it's just me in front of a chalkboard, talking about whatever it is that we're doing.
that's amazing. I mean, and I think it's interesting to hear that those are the things that people like asked for when you gave them the opportunity, because it does seem like in the digital space, people are attracted a little bit more to like 19th and 20th century European philosophy. There's something about existentialism and idealism and some of the stuff that comes out of that people connect to, which I do find interesting, and something I've found interesting in the years that I've been doing YouTube philosophy based stuff, like almost reframing things around what are the topics or concepts that seem to appeal to folks on this medium. What do people that
Mm,
are here seem the most excited to hear and talk about? And the thing I find encouraging about it is often it's topics and things like that that apply to life, that are things that deal with like
yeah.
philosophers reckoning with what it means to exist, what it means to engage with culture, how we navigate aspects of culture that feel bad or confusing. So there's something kind of nice about that.
Well, and that's a reason why going back to like ancient and medieval
Mhm.
philosophy gets a lot of traction too,
Yeah.
because a lot of it is very, I mean, not all of it's immediately practicable, but you can like just think a couple steps and say, okay, here's how we actually use these concepts in the scope of our life. And yeah, analytic philosophy, I won't say all of them, but some of them really lost the thread in that
Mhm.
respect. Um,
Yeah.
John, I will recommend like a couple, like Iris Murdoch, John
Mhm.
Wisdom, people like that. They were very, very interested. Even Bertrand Russell in some of his essays, right, are interested in, well, what would you actually do with this stuff? So
Mhm.
that's kind of good.
Yeah. Well, then how did and at what point, and I don't know your exact professional background situation, was there a point then where you transitioned from being a full-time traditional
Yeah.
academic who puts stuff on YouTube to working more in a hybrid model where you teach and do online stuff and write on the internet and all this other stuff you do?
I mean, I was doing some of that when I was still a professor.
Mhm.
And actually, if I had stayed at Fayetteville State University, I was up for early tenure and promotion,
Mhm.
and I like wrote parts of their 10-year quality enhancement plan. I was like moving up in
Mhm.
administration. But the thing that changed that was being in love.
Yep, love will do that.
And yeah, and Andy and I met back in high school,
Oh wow.
and she had a crush on me, didn't tell me because one of her friends, like, had a crush on me as well, and basically
So the
called it.
burnouts were popular at your
Oh
high
yeah, yeah. Well, in a certain set,
school. Yeah.
and she, we went different ways, and then we crossed paths again in the 1990s.
Mm.
Worked in the same office building, flirted with each other, but both of us were going out with different people at the time, and then reconnected through Facebook in 2009, and began writing to each other. And we had this epistolary romance for going on for, it was 3 months before we actually talked.
Wow.
And we'd already fallen in love with each other through writing about 3,000 to 4,000 words a day, because Facebook ended up like blocking us from messaging each other. She made a blog because she was very tech savvy.
Yeah.
So then we'd already decided we wanted to have a life together and get married. And then the question was, well, how are we going to make this happen? So we did the long distance relationship thing for about a year and a half. And I mean, it was great to be with her, obviously, but the long distance part sucked because either I would have to like drive from Fayetteville up to Kingston, New York, which is about a 14-hour drive.
It's not short.
Yeah, or I'd drive up to Raleigh. I'd get on a flight from there to JFK. She would drive 2 hours down to JFK if traffic wasn't bad, pick me up, drive up to Kingston, and then we'd have 48 hours together before she had to get me back down to the airport for me to go back down. And we had a bit more time, like we'd get together at conferences or in the summer and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that then kind of led in your personal life, falling in love and moving
Yeah.
coincided with a moment where you could pursue philosophy in a more hybrid or diversified way than
Yeah,
you
I
had
started
before?
working as an adjunct,
Yeah.
and as an adjunct, you don't have any of this like pressure to do all the other things that you have to do. I mean, I still applied for full-time jobs,
Mhm.
but just like in the area, and the job market sucked.
Mhm.
So I
Been
didn't
there,
really
yeah.
get much traction. And I'm not naturally entrepreneurial, but Andy is. And so there were a lot of things along the way where people were like, "Hey, do you think you could do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
Mhm.
I got to figure out how much to charge you for it. But yeah, sure, I can go give a workshop here, or like Google actually started me doing the tutoring stuff, which I'd
Uh-huh.
done before. Um, but face to face, Google came out with something, Google Helpouts, because Google has this
I never
long.
heard of this. Google
It
Helpouts.
was like 2012, and by 2014 they'd totally gotten rid of it. The way that Google loves to like bring out products and then not support them and then say we're done with this.
Yeah.
So they did that, and I was like, well, I could do this over at that time. Zoom didn't exist. I think I was using Skype.
Skype, yeah.
So I was like, well, I could, tutor people. And, I just wound up adding bits and pieces here. And now I would say, I still teach, but I would say probably 25% of my work is like traditional academic
Mhm.
teaching. And then the rest is just business stuff, that I've
Yeah.
got. Oh, somebody wrote it's the Google graveyard. Yeah, that's a great line for that.
I know there's been I remember when what was it? What was like the RSS feed option in
Oh,
Google? I forget what it was called. But I
yeah.
remember how I used to use the internet, especially in grad school, is I followed mostly like philosophy and theory blogs that I all had in my RSS reader. And I would
That's right,
go
yeah. It
on
was
that.
called Google Reader.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would go on that like every morning. And that was sort of I mean, a great way to consume ideas, a way that I like made friends and stuff like that. And I remember when they shut that down, it was just like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna? And then I think that kind of did like lead to a pretty big decline in a lot of the philosophical and academic blogging because it was a pain in the ass to try to keep track of, all your favorite blogs with bookmarks. And I feel like maybe that's when people started relying more on social media and stuff.
I think too, that's when other platforms, because Google had Blogger and a lot of
Yeah.
people were on Blogger. And then people started moving more to WordPress and
Mhm.
then to Medium, and a couple other places where you would publish your stuff.
Yeah, it was a weird time.
Yeah.
Well, so some more like, I guess, not meta questions, but a thing I've been thinking about and that I'm interested in is doing, and I guess you used this term earlier, a version of public philosophy
Okay. Yeah.
on people doing YouTube podcasts, whatever, and some of the potential and the positive things there, and maybe some of the negative sides. I'm wondering, what have you found to be the most useful, interesting, positive thing about your work in doing public philosophy? And I think you're a really interesting example because you just have like a huge archive. You have thousands of videos on your channel. You have lectures and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What is it about that format and that way of doing things that you have found to be so useful, valuable, or even important in your interaction with your audience?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the kind of stuff that I do breaks into a couple categories.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is what we could call very broadly public philosophy. Like what we're doing right now, this is public philosophy. You know, we're reaching out to a public and people can come in and learn about stuff. And maybe we'll talk about the issues of the day or, you know, more foundational stuff. But we're not like, okay, today we're talking about Cicero and we're going to delve into this and that and that. So I do a good bit of that. But I would say more of what I do is developing sort of perennial resources that hopefully will be there for a long time. Like the Half Hour Hegel series, I probably made a couple cultural references to things of the day. I don't know, because I shot 370 odd videos on it over 9 years. So and people are like, what did you mean when you wrote at this moment or you said at this moment, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, come on, man. I've done, 1,500 videos since then. I don't know what the hell I was saying, it's not like I didn't know what I was talking about, but I don't remember every one of those things that I said. So, the goal was less to be like oriented to the public in that way and more like provide resources that anybody out there, if they want to study philosophy, could make use of. And that'll probably be more my legacy, right?
Yeah.
And then, there's all sorts of like weird side projects. Like I do this thing on speculative fiction once a month, and me and Scott Trulli get together and do a classic metal class once a month. And those are sort of like fun, guilty pleasures.
Yeah, I want to shout the metal class out too, because I'm sure a lot of people who are here and watching know Gregory's work. But the metal class, some of you might be surprised by. I think that's a very cool thing that you also use your platform.
I will say, though, I do have to caution people. It is classic metal class. So we're not talking about like, what's happening from 2010 onward and this latest band or stuff like that. Because there's plenty of channels doing that.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's the era? When we say classic metal?
70s and 80s. And then the bands from that era that continued on. And then you could also say the bands that have chosen to follow in those footsteps. So what we call traditional heavy metal, so you could have a band that's that formed in 2016, but they're trying to sound like Armored Saint or Iron Maiden or, Rat or whoever. So people sometimes get in and they're like, why aren't you talking about, so, we did a thing on doom metal recently and people were, I put a social media post and they're like, I hope you talk about this person and that person. And I was like, yeah, not going to happen. So sometimes people get disappointed and mad about that, but we each kind of have our lane and we should stay in it. I know that era because I came up in that era. But I don't know, every band that's out there, on that note too. So I'd be curious to hear your take on this and whether you get this. So, there's like literally tens of thousands of philosophy authors getting published every year, maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't know. And you'll get people who will be like, have you heard of Frederick Bunkeluk? What do you think of their book, blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, I've never read their book. I don't know who the hell you're talking about. I mean, it's cool that you have, but I'll never read them because I can barely keep up with my reading that I'm doing,
It's hard. Like sometimes there was someone who recently left a bunch of comments on different videos referencing someone, I forget their name, but it was like that.
Okay.
Where it was like, you need to read this person. This person knows it all. And I was kind of just like, I don't know. Like, I think they probably don't. And I'm excited that you're excited about that thing. But, it almost reminds me of the feeling I had when I was an undergraduate, maybe early grad student, when I would occasionally read a book and think to myself, like, this is it.
Yeah.
This person,
yeah.
Has it all. And then, you slowly expand your scope and realize that a lot of the best philosophical commentary or even original text are just kind of like circling around the same stuff, overlapping, contributing to the same discussion. I think as we get older, almost everyone I know just goes back to like, I could just read Aristotle and feel pretty okay if I just did that. But yeah, but it's an interesting one because I never would want to tell anyone not to read stuff that they find interesting. But at the end of the day, I tend to just stick with a lot of rereadings of the original text that I
Yeah.
like a lot. And when I read secondary stuff, it's normally just by people I already am aware of, or if someone highly recommends it. But really, really hard to keep up with all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think when it comes to secondary lit, there's like the secondary authors who are interpreting people that we like in a interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
So like, Heidegger is a great example. I mean, you can read Heidegger's stuff for its own sake, like Being in Time or, various essays, but he did all these lectures that are very interesting as well. And you don't go to it, like if Heidegger's lecturing about Nietzsche, or Aristotle, or Kant, you don't expect that you're getting like the straight stuff, right? You're
Yeah.
getting it with a total Heidegger spin. Deleuze is very good that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's got books on Leibniz and Spinoza and Hume and Bergson and Nietzsche, and you read them and you're like, wow, this is really cool, interesting stuff. But it's like 3/4 Deleuze and one quarter Nietzsche.
Yeah.
So is it secondary or is it not? It's kind of like in a weird, what would you call it? Like, I guess it's a hybrid, right? And then, there's like secondary lit where they're just into this
Mm-hmm.
thinker, and they're going to do a good job in explaining it. And that can be kind of fun sometimes to look at. And that's kind of like what I'm doing in the videos a lot of the time. I'm not trying to bring my own ideas in. I just want to like convey, what Kant is doing or what Cicero's doing in this place. But I don't read a lot of other secondary lit unless I'm like writing an article specifically on Anselm and what he has to say about the will. Then I'll read some other people, or what Aristotle has to say about acrasia. Then I'll read some recent articles about it. But otherwise, why? It's, unless you're going to become a Plato scholar, you don't need to like do a survey of all the secondary lit that's out there. I mean, you couldn't anyway.
Take a lot of time. Well, when you're writing original stuff these days, like what is the relationship between that and the lectures and videos you're making? Is it a thing where like you will be inspired to or motivated to write something based on your teaching and your online work? Or is that just kind of a separate thing where your writing is to do with like what you are interested in and what you just as individual guy want to be thinking about?
I don't know that I write much that actually turns out to be original.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of like being a musician and thinking, yeah, I'm going to make a song that nobody's made before. And you riff for a while and then you play it back and you're like, oh, that's partly from Dio and that's partly from Judas Priest. And that's okay. I'm cool with that. So, a lot of times in the past, people would be like, hey man, when are you going to write your own book of philosophy? And, my answer was, well, why the hell would I want to do that? I don't need to clutter up the landscape with yet one more book that's probably third rate when I can read first rate people. But I mean, I do write some personal essays and stuff like that, but it'll be like my reflections on working at the cat shelter and getting attached to cats,
Also, I feel like you're not the first person I've met that's been a metal guy and a cat guy. I feel like I've met a few metal and cat guys. Is there a connection between that, you think? Does metal set one up to be an empathetic person that loves cuddly kittens?
I don't know that there's like an intrinsic connection between the overarching genre of music. But I did see this interesting like meme floating around out there, and I think there's probably some truth to it, that and it was aimed at women, and it was about like men who don't like cats and men who do like cats. Now, this is going to be some total, like, top down generalization, but I think there's something to this. So cats are different than dogs. Dogs are hypersocial. Cats they tend to look at us as kind of equals, and you maybe need more, like you said, empathy or, some attentiveness with cats than you do with dogs. And you can't really, I mean, you can try to dominate a cat, but the cat's going to hate your guts. Whereas a dog might just see you as like it's um, the top dog in the pack and all that, and be cool with that. So a guy who can't get along with a cat, and says stuff like "I hate cats" or something like that, it was saying women, you ought to watch out for guys like that, because they're not going to treat you very well either. I think there's probably something to that, and it doesn't have to be just a gender dynamic thing. It could be like, women who don't like cats. And why don't you like them? Because you feel like, I mean, unless you have a weird, pathological phobia because, I don't know, cats attacked you when you were a 5-year-old kid and you were thrown in a closet with them. It's probably because you don't like things that you can't control and that you have to actually like make an effort to get in good with. So I think it's kind of a good index. Now, there's plenty of metalheads who are just complete a-holes. And I think that when I was a teenager, I was pretty oblivious to a lot of people. And, I was certainly far too aggressive. I was getting in fights all the time. I got in so much trouble that I actually became a ward of the court. My mother filed an uncontrollability petition against me. And, I was in juvenile detention for a while and
Oh shit.
really had to work on a lot of stuff. So I don't know that age metalhead necessarily was a good guy, who, had empathy or anything like that. But yeah, there's probably something to it. And it's interesting because the stereotype of heavy metal is that it makes you aggressive and angry and mean and all that kind of stuff. And what we have learned through, and I'm not going to say like this is absolutely scientific or anything, but what we've learned is that for metalheads, people who listen to it all the time, listening to heavy metal tends to make you calmer, right? So I don't know, I don't want to say that there's a direct correlation between metal and cat engagement, but maybe there's like with Venn diagrams, there's kind of an overlapping there. And it's funny too, because if you're a guy who really likes cats, look at how the people on the far right, they denigrate. Oh, it's mostly against women because they're almost all misogynist. They're like, oh, you're going to be a cat lady, and then women are like,
That's so weird.
Yeah, that's cool with me, because I do like the cats, and I think they look down on guys who like cats as well, unless they're like, your tame tiger or lion or something.
Well. Thank you for letting me do that metal and cat digression. To ask at least one more kind of philosophy focused question for you. I'm wondering how you've navigated the pedagogical issue over the years of teaching philosophy effectively in a room by yourself. And I think that, and I'm sure others have experienced this. I know when I used to teach in a classroom, it was often that level of interaction with, sorry, 1 second. Level of like interaction with students in the classroom would often change or pivot how I would be teaching about stuff. There'd be times where, I think I would have one lesson plan. A student might ask a question. The question would make me go back to think about the text. Maybe I'd even then be like, actually, let's go back and look at that. And then that leads to 20 minutes of like reading something together. And that ends up being the most interesting class of the term or something.
Yeah.
And sometimes in creating philosophical content or trying to do stuff when you're just recording it to video, it's a very different dynamic. So I'm just wondering how you've navigated that, if it's something you've thought about or experienced, or if you've sort of developed new methods or strategies when you do your, chalk and talk sessions and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to joke around, I'd say, well, you just listen to the voices in your head, but I don't actually have any voices in my head. Maybe it would be helpful to suffer from that in that case. Um, yeah, when I first started doing it, it felt very artificial.
Mm-hmm.
I first started doing it at Marist College, and I was doing it for those like 1 hour long existentialism class videos that I was producing at the time. And I would just get myself an empty classroom and, have my notes and set up and have the text and just, lecture. Um, Now my lecturing style, and I imagine you're probably is as well, is kind of dialogical
Mm-hmm.
to begin with. Like some people actually, I've seen them get up and they've got like their lecture notes written out and they just stick to that. And
I've seen that.
that's really,
It's hard to imagine that. Like, I'm sure there's students for whom that works, but
yeah,
I don't. I don't. It wouldn't have worked for me as a student, and I was a little
me
bit
either.
more
Yeah.
like you as someone growing up who kind of like got in trouble and wasn't always the best student and was a little bit unfocused. So I think, we maybe all teach to some eternal version of our young self. But yeah, my young self
That's a good point.
would
Yeah.
not have done well with the person just reading an incredibly dense lecture at me for an hour.
Yeah. So you've already then got a little bit of prep in how to put it. I mean, there isn't an audience there, right? But you're sort of anticipating, okay, if there were an audience here, what would I be saying to them and how would I be saying it? What kind of examples could I come up with that they could relate to? What one of the things I often thought about, and I did this first in like in-person classes, and then I would do it like when I was doing the videos just by myself, is thinking, where is Kant or Aristotle or Mary Wollstonecraft going to trip these people up? Like, what terminology are they not going to get, or what part of the argument that's being made is going to be totally confusing to them? And then I would like focus in on that. So I think that was probably helpful. And then I think, I don't know, there must have been some point where it went from being artificial to just knowing that there's an audience out there that's going to be watching this
Mm-hmm.
and not even thinking about the fact that I'm lecturing to an empty classroom. Like, when we're done, after I like take a little break and go get some coffee, I'm going to go and shoot some videos on Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods I mean, you can actually see, here we go. There's the camera
Yeah,
right
yeah.
there. And there's people here in this building, but they don't care what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
They probably are like, well, that guy's talking to himself again, you know? So I think after a while, like anything
Yeah.
else, you just start feeling okay with it. And
Yeah.
maybe some people don't. Maybe some people, it's always weird for them and they just can't do it.
Well, what do you think then you kind of, after doing what you've done for as many years, do you have like an audience in your head in a sense? Like, have you
Oh,
kind of imagined and via comments and engagement and all this sort of stuff,
no, I've
made sense of
never,
that?
I've never had like a bunch of avatars
Yeah.
and a representative audience in my head. And that's probably good because, like you mentioned in the classroom, like each crop of students that you get are going to be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And when they like say something back to you, it might lead you to doing something creative and productive with them.
Yeah.
And so, like you can take me and drop me with pretty much anybody you like, and I can probably carry on a conversation with them. And if they want to talk about philosophy, I can do that. And I don't need it to be like, I mean, that's an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of people who you take them out of like a strictly academic setting that they're used to and they're totally at sea. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have any clue what to say. I'm and I gather you're like this too. I'm the kind of person who just likes to talk to people and find out what makes them tick, and then maybe have something interesting to bring
Mhm.
forward to them. Um, but yeah, it's not like there's. So when I first started out like doing my own business stuff, uh, Andy was into like looking at these platforms for like start your own business.
Mhm.
And they'd always talk about like, who is your ideal client? And that would trip me up because I'd be like, oh, I don't have an ideal client.
Yeah.
I think my stuff appeals to like 28 different kinds of people, and they don't all have things in common. So, and that's basically where we'd stop working on the platform because I'd get stuck there.
Yeah.
So
Well, I want to ask you about one more thing, if you don't mind, before
sure.
I get going. I know that along with all of your work, you do philosophical counseling.
Mm.
That's something I find very interesting. I think that some folks probably are aware that that's a thing. Um, God, hold on. Sorry, I have someone like ringing my doorbell repeatedly, but I don't want to get up from this. Would you mind if I get up for 1 second? I'm so
No, it's
sorry,
fine.
Gregory. Chat, be nice.
Yeah, let's see if there's any interesting, cool stuff here in the chat. There's a lot of comments. Looks like there's a lot of discussion between people in the chat too, which is a healthy sign of a good channel.
Woo. Okay, guys, sorry about that. It was the most Los Angeles thing ever, friends. Someone was ringing my back doorbell because they're filming something in this neighborhood over the weekend and wanted to see if they could rent me and my neighbor's driveway to use for something. So that was fun. But now let me get.
Well, that's nice because it's better than somebody saying that like you owe them money. You're going to actually make a little bit on it.
Yeah. Well, let me get back to my question I was asking before. The person friggin' wouldn't stop ringing that goddamn bell. Philosophical counseling.
Oh yeah.
I'm just curious to hear a little bit about this. It's something I'm aware of, if heard about it. I think I've always found it interesting because I do think there's a very interpersonal and therapeutic element to philosophy, especially
Yeah.
of the classical model. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about that and what that work is like.
Well, so it was something that I got into because I realized I was doing it for free without any like specific
Uh-huh.
training already. I was I've always been interested in, well, how can you apply philosophy? And so I'd be like with colleagues or family members or friends, and I would be like, Anselm says this, and this
Mhm.
would be helpful, or Aristotle says this. So when I found out that there was an actual like certification and training program for it, and there's actually two, because there's two different
Yeah.
organizations, out there. I thought, oh yeah, that'd be kind of good. And it would help me to have like I don't know, an umbrella to do what I was already doing part of the time and be able to make a living at it.
Mhm.
So I chose to go with the American Philosophical Practitioners
Mhm.
Association, which is very humanities based and a bit more eclectic. The other one is more like oriented towards the critical thinking movement and all of that. And so, you go down there, you do a lot of reading and prep beforehand. You go down to New York City and you have these very intensive workshops. And then, by the end of it, you're ready to go out and start doing that. And
Mhm.
part of what they actually do in the training is like nuts and bolts things. How do you set up a practice? Make sure you get insurance for liability. Here's what that looks like. And they very much stress that this is not a medical
Mhm.
practice, and it's deliberately so. And by the way, in Europe it's not called philosophical counseling, it's called philosophical practice, which is
Mhm.
probably a better
Yeah.
term. So what you do is it could be like group work, it could be, because I've done some corporate gigs using it. I've done some executive coaching. But most of it is working with individual clients I specialize like in anger management
Mhm.
and some other matters. And so you work with them. You have certain things like, you keep confidentiality just like you would with a
Yeah.
psychological counselor, but you're taking stuff from philosophy, whatever you want to call it, concepts, constructs, and you're saying this would be helpful for you. Try it out. Sometimes you recommend readings to people, and that helps them out. Um, and sometimes you actually, you're like, hey, I don't think I can help you. Maybe it's called therapy for the sane. So if
Mhm.
somebody like has a serious psychological problem, you're probably not going to be able to help them with that. If they're severely depressed, reading, Aristotle or the Stoics is not going to be enough for that, right?
Yeah.
But for a lot of our life problems, it's very helpful to have somebody who's trained in philosophy, and not just like, standard for academic philosophy, but, reading the people who in the past took this seriously as a kind of therapy, and, working with them dialogically, I would
Mhm.
say.
That's really interesting. I that's something that, yeah. No, I just like that that exists as a thing.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes, I'm sure it's a thing a lot of people that have had a background in philosophy do, where there's times if I am talking to a friend about going through something, I've probably annoyingly a few times been like, "Have you ever read Aristotle before?" Because I think there's
Yeah.
some stuff there. But it does, I think that's great, because I think often philosophy can be viewed as, like a logical problem solving
Yeah.
mechanism or
Yeah.
something like that, or a way to make you feel smart, and connecting it directly to the idea of personal growth
Yeah.
is really, really cool. And I imagine then there's like an overlap in that practice. And I mean, because you basically said you were already doing it without getting paid to do it. So does it feel like an extension of sort of what it's looked like in the past to have a conversation with a student who's going through something and applying it to their life?
Yeah. Although, um, usually they're not a student. It's not necessarily like a complete peer-to-peer
Mhm.
relationship, but it's
Yeah.
it's less hierarchical, I
Mhm,
think you
mhm,
could
mhm.
say. Although who knows? Maybe there's some people out there who they're like, I am hair professor and I will, tell you exactly what you need to do. Maybe there's some people who are into that kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
Um,
That's cool. Well, before I let you go, what are some things you have? You mentioned this before. What can people be on the lookout in terms of things you are working
oh,
on? I know that you host, you do some online classes and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
what are some things people can be looking for, or look into if they want to spend more time learning from you?
Well, so over in the channel, there's always new stuff coming out. I've got a Substack now as well, and I do some writing there and publish some exclusive videos there, and some podcast content. Yeah, I do have online classes, and those are at the Study with Sadler Academy.
Mhm.
Some of them are like synchronous classes, which means that we meet like once a week. We're doing a Stoicism and the Cardinal Virtues one right now, and the next one after that is Aristotle on the Moral Virtues, an 8-week class. And then there's a lot of like standalone, you work at your own pace, which are in part, videos and podcasts that I've done as part of the core, but also like lesson pages and handouts. And the videos are actually like the audio is better than it is
Mhm.
in the YouTube channel. Um, but it's kind of funny. I was on somebody else's thing last week and they said, where can people find you? And my standard answer now is, well, just put Gregory Sadler in Google,
Yeah.
because it sucks to be any other Gregory Sadler. And there's about 30 or 40 of them out there.
You're the
They,
number one?
yeah, and they can't get any traction.
Oh, sucks
You
to
got
be
to go
me.
through like 10 pages of my stuff before you get to Gregory Sadler photography or Gregory Sadler, the libertarian candidate, or there's a drummer, So it's good for me
Oh,
because
you're lucky. There's currently a Michael Burns, who's the head of a studio in Hollywood, who's one of the main guys that wants to
I
fire
saw, yeah,
everyone
yeah.
to use AI for stuff. So there was a day where like all I saw Michael Burns like trending. I was like, what did I do?
Oh
And it's
man.
like, oh, I'm ruining Hollywood. I'm firing all the animators. So easy. Just Google Gregory. Well, I would love to do this again sometime. Maybe we can talk about a topic we're both into, but I really wanted just to chat about your work and get to know you a bit.
Yeah,
And
thanks for
was
having me
really,
on.
really appreciate you doing that. Excited to see the stuff you're doing. And thanks for doing it, because I often have over the years many times recommended your videos when I've been working on stuff that's a little bit more light, to say, you want to dig more into Hegel, you want to dig more into Socrates. Here's hours of lectures and chalkboards. So
Yeah.
thank you for what you provide.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thanks for directing people to it.
Yeah.
I never know like who's actually using my stuff, because it's
Uh,
absolutely impossible to get a beat on that.
yeah.
So
Amazing. Well, enjoy the rest of your summer day in the Great Lakes region of America. And hopefully we'll talk again soon, Greg.
sounds good.
Awesome. Have a good one.
I'll see you later.
Guys, that was Professor Gregory Sadler. We do have his YouTube channel linked right there. It's linked in the description. What an interesting and nice guy.